So let's keep reading the book of Revelation. And he, this Antichrist, was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. And that's Revelation 13, 5-7. So don't be confused into thinking that this is just some sort of Israel-centric issue that's going to take place in the Middle East, far away from wherever you happen to live in the West, or whatever part of the world you're listening to this audio teaching or watching this YouTube video from. Just get it out of your mind. Once Satan infills his puppet Antichrist at the midpoint of the week and pours all of his efforts into the Antichrist's dealings here on planet Earth, once that takes place, remember, Satan's kicked out of heaven at that point, so he can't get back into heaven, so he's got this great wrath, so he pours all of his energy into his puppet Antichrist. Once that takes place, the Antichrist is going to ramp up whatever program he's already been cooking at this point in time, which probably for the first part of the 70th week will largely be centered in the Middle East part of the world, perhaps involving parts of Turkey, Russia, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Libya, Ethiopia, the parts of Europe that would include the part that we recognize as the European Union. Perhaps most of those places will already have been feeling the intense programs and machinations of the Antichrist, the manipulations that this man will have been doing in the political world scene, in the financial world scene. So maybe those parts of the world will be more impacted at first, but at the midpoint, he's going to take this thing global. He's going to go international. And so that's why John says he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. That's language that indicates that this is a worldwide event that's going to spill out into the rest of the world. And no matter where you live in the world, technology has now made it possible for basically a very few amount of people to control the entire world. And we know that the Antichrist's eighth beast empire will be a collection of 10 nations that will give their direct allegiance to him, a 10-nation coalition, right, corresponding to the 10 toes in Daniel chapter 2 and the 10 horns in Daniel chapter 7, and then having a one-to-one correlation to those 10 nations in Revelation chapter 17, the 10 crowns and the 10 rulers, etc., etc. So let's keep reading Joel Richardson. He says, the prophet Daniel also saw that the Antichrist would have this authority to wage a successful war against, quote, the saints, end quote. Saints is also translated as holy ones in some translations of the Bible. Joel says it speaks primarily of the true followers of Jesus who know and serve the one true God. I find that quite interesting that when we look at Daniel that we're going to quote here, Daniel uses this phrase, saints, which from Daniel's perspective in his time would have naturally been associated with the people of Israel, particularly those who did not compromise in their faith in Israel's God, and yet nevertheless, they still got swept up within the exile off to Babylon, right? Daniel would have been a prime example. Daniel was not a rebel. He was not an apostate Jew at that time. He was not someone who doubted God. Rather, he had and demonstrated his genuine faith in God right from the very beginning. If you've read through the book of Daniel, a very short book, 12 chapters, right at the very beginning, Daniel's purposing in his heart that he's not going to defile himself with the king's delicacies. He and his three friends, right, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, have this incredible faith in God, so much so that they are not going to bow to the image that's set up before them, even at the point of death, right? They get thrown into the fiery furnace because they refuse to apostatize. They refuse to back down under the face of pressure, and they refuse to give up their faith in God. And so they get carted off to Babylon along with those who were rebels and those who were in a position where they'd broken faith with God, and the whole reason why God had allowed Babylon to conquer Jerusalem and do something that no other nation at that point in time had done. So the holy ones, the saints that Daniel writes about, are people like himself. They're holy ones within Israel's ranks. But what's interesting is by the time we get to the writings of the apostolic scriptures, we now understand that this phrase saints includes not just righteous from within Israel, but it includes righteous from the nations as well, those from the Gentiles who have been grafted into Israel's ranks via their faith in Messiah. They don't become Jews, but they do become Israelites in the regard that they are covenantally bound to a relationship with God through his son Yeshua. They become the bride of Messiah. We see this as the remnant of Israel, those who are truly naming the name of Yeshua, both from Jews and from Gentiles. So now this phrase saints, we who are Christians, Gentiles, when we read through the book of Daniel, we now read it through with the understanding of the apostolic scriptures in view. We now realize that the saints does include Gentiles. Daniel might not have seen that from his perspective at the time, because the mystery of the Gentiles, the mystery of the gospel, was still something that was hidden to the prophetic writers of his day. Let's read what Daniel did record for us. Speaking of that Antichrist, he will speak against the Most High and oppress his saints and try to change the set times and the laws. And this also fits in, Joel's going to talk about, with Islamic eschatology, seeking to change everything over to Sharia law, right? If the Antichrist comes out of a Muslim model or an Islamic model, Sharia law might be that ingredient or element that Daniel was referring to here prophetically. Daniel continues, the saints, remember, Daniel wrote from the perspective that these were Israelites, that they were Jewish people. Daniel was probably not understanding that this would include people from the surrounding nations who were grafted into Israel, because that was part of the mystery that was hidden from the Old Testament writers to be revealed only in the time frame of the apostolic scriptures during the time of Yeshua and afterwards. Specifically, Paul was given the primary task of revealing this mystery to the Gentiles. That's why he was called the apostle to the Gentiles. So the saints that Daniel describes, probably not understanding that this includes Gentiles. But now when we read through the New Testament, we understand that this does include genuine Gentile believers. So the saints will be handed over. And I keep highlighting this. Let me just interject. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I don't want you to read through the book of Daniel and go, oh, Daniel was just talking about the Jewish people. Right? This is going to affect me as a Gentile Christian because it says the saints, and the saints were talking about the Israelites, so it doesn't include me. No, you're misunderstanding the mystery of the gospel if that's your mindset. You're misreading the prophecy if you think that the saints who are loyal to God in Daniel's day are one people group, and the saints who are loyal to God in today's time frame is a different people group, but yet prophecy is running the span between when Daniel wrote and when we are living as well. Remember, Daniel's words were written beforehand, but they apply to the days that we live in, which are the last days. Okay, so Daniel says that the saints will be handed over to him, speaking of the Antichrist. How long? For a time, times, and half a time. So that's somewhat comforting to know that it's not the entire 70th week that Satan will have a successful campaign against the people of God, persecution over them. It doesn't say that the saints will be handed over to him for a time, a time, a time, a time, a time, a time, and a time. That's 7 times, right? Or something like that. It doesn't say that. It just says a time, times, and half a times, which we've already talked about in previous studies, is best understood to be 3.5 years. A time there being 1 year, the second times being 2 years. So time and times, that's 3 years. Then half a time being half of a year. So 3.5 years. And that's, of course, from Daniel 7:25. So let's read Joel Richardson's commentary on this passage that we just read. Again here, Joel says we see the reference to the 3.5 year period that Antichrist will persecute those who resist him. It's like the old Star Trek Borg concept. Resistance is futile. From the Antichrist perspective, resistance will be futile. You either take the mark or you die. You either take the number of his name or you die. You either worship the Antichrist or you die. You bow down to the image or you die. So this concept that the Antichrist is going to be utilizing in the last days, where he is forcing worship of himself fits nicely within the eschatological worldview that Islam is already describing in their religious writings, which would include either the Quran or the Hadith, right, or a combination of those two. They have this model of, and they've already used this, and we've seen this in history, of convert or die. Now, of course, I mentioned last week that Christianity has borrowed that model a few times as well, during the Crusades, during the Inquisitions, etc., convert to Christianity or die. But we've also quickly commented that this is not the biblical way of bringing people into the family of God and bringing people into the kingdom. Jesus was not about forced conversions and putting people to the sword if they didn't follow his ways. That was not the way of God. That's not the way of our Messiah. And yet Islam doesn't have the same worldview. They believe that it is okay to put infidels and unbelievers to the sword, those who don't yield to the regime of their religious rulers and their one world Islamic program. Again, I'm not trying to generalize all Muslims who hold this belief. I'm simply saying that this is something that the Quran teaches, and that these teachings are present within Islamic religious circles, and thus we can say that these teachings are present. And even though maybe many Muslims might be opposed to that concept of forced conversion or jihad or something to that effect, they're non-violent type of Muslim peoples, and praise God for that perspective. We need more Muslims like that. But the fact that those details exist within their religious writings is an alarming detail that we need to be aware of. So let's keep reading Joel Richardson's notes here. We've got a good amount of time. I'm looking at my time here, and I'm just making great time. Joel says, the Bible is clear then, that we just read Daniel. The Bible is clear then the Antichrist will specifically target those who resist his attempts to establish his religion over the earth. This is true, I might add, whether you hold to a European model of the Antichrist, coming out of Europe, coming out of a revived Roman Empire, coming out of some form of Gentile world power where he exerts his influence over the Middle East, brokers a peace treaty, but he himself is not either Israeli or Muslim, right? He's a third-party member. Or you hold to, like Joel Richardson does, the Islamic Antichrist model, where the Antichrist rises up out of Islamic ranks. He is viewed as a religious figure, the 12th Imam, the Mahdi that we've been talking about. And this Antichrist figure seeks to usher in some form of one world religion and world peace, but it's seen through the lens of the Islamic eschatology. And so either way, it's his attempt to establish a one world religion are going to succeed for a short time, whether we believe it's an Islamic world religion or some form of ecumenical religion where all of them are smashed together. Remember that graphic I put on the screen last week? Coexist. You guys have seen these bumper stickers where all the religions kind of agree with one another peaceably, as it were, to kind of stop fighting amongst themselves. This would include Islam in that model. I don't know exactly in the European model what the one world religion is supposed to look like. Is it supposed to look like Christianity? It's supposed to look like Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, like over here in the East where I live, in Asia where I live? Or is it supposed to look like Hinduism, like in India and things like that? Is it supposed to look like some form of New Age religion like we see in other parts of the world? Is it supposed to look like some form of an African religion? The details aren't given in the Bible, but what we do know is that there will be some form of one world religion that's utilized by the Antichrist up until a point in time to where we're describing what the Bible calls the Mystery Babylon, the woman in Revelation chapter 17, the one who's riding the beast. Up until a certain point in time, Antichrist and her will have some what we call mutual agreement between one another to benefit one another. The religion benefits from the Antichrist, and the Antichrist benefits from the religion. But truly, the Antichrist isn't interested in this religion. At some point in time, his God is a God of fortresses, like Daniel describes. His God is a God of military might and military power and resources that keep him in power from a military perspective. That's his true God. And so he doesn't really care about religion. He'll just co-opt it for a while and allow it to exist to suit his needs up until a point, like the book of Revelation talks about in Revelation chapter 17, near the end of the chapter, he and those 10-nation coalition that are behind him, that will be backing him, they will, and the Bible uses this language, they will hate the woman and burn her. So even if you hold to an Islamic model or a European model, doesn't matter. When it comes to the one world religion that's established over all the earth, like Joel's describing here, at some point in time, the Antichrist and the 10 nations will throw that aspect of their one world government off because it won't serve their needs. And indeed, the entire world isn't really interested in religion anyway. They just want their power and their position and their military might and their money, right? Money, show me the money. All right, let's read Joel Richardson's from his book. Let's keep reading here. He says, from the book of Revelation, as well as the prophet Daniel, we see that the two groups that Satan is most enraged against are the Jews and the Christians. And I'm sorry I keep interjecting, but as Joel's about to describe, we're going to find that in the Islamic model, it's those two people groups who are already targeted as infidels. And the Islamic religious writings refer to these people as pigs and dogs. I can't remember which one's which. I don't know if the Jews are the pigs and the Christians are the dogs, or if the Jews are the dogs and the Christians are the pigs. I think it's that the Jews are the pigs and the Christians are the dogs. But they use that language to describe the infidels, the unbelievers. Another phrase that shows up in Islamic writings are the people of the book, to describe people who believe in the Bible as their preeminent religious leader, their religious form of scripture or text, as opposed to good standing Muslims who believe that the Quran is above the Bible. So let's read these details. So this next paragraph is going to begin to deal with this topic of the Mahdi's targeted campaign against Jews and Christians. And remember, I'll flash this little graphic on the screen in post-production. Those of you who are with me in the live class right now, just play along. The graphic that you should be seeing on your screen right now in post is a graphic that shows a parallel between the three main Islamic religious figures on the left side of the screen and three main religious figures in biblical eschatology on the right side of the screen. And the one-to-one correlation, reading from the top, are on the top left, we have the Mahdi in Islamic circles, and you see the little arrow pointing to the right. That corresponds parallel one-to-one to the Antichrist in the Bible. The next one down in the middle of the list, the second one down, is the it says Isa, I-S-A. That's the Arabic name for Jesus. And in Islamic circles, he's the junior partner to the Mahdi. He's the Robin to Islam's Batman in the dynamic duo as example that I've used in the past. So Isa is the Islamic Jesus, and the arrow pointing to the right shows that his one-to-one parallel is the false prophet in the Bible. So that's the parallel figure there, the person. And then the last person on the lower left side of your screen is a person by the name of Dajjal, D-A-J-J-A-L, which is an Islamic figure who is an evil guy. He's a villain in their eschatology stories. He's a bad guy. He's a villain of the piece. And the arrow shows that the one-to-one correlation is actually Jesus Christ of the Bible. He's our Messiah. So using those figures, Islam calls them signs. I think they even call them major signs, if I remember. Using those three figures, we're focusing most of our energy in this Islamic topic on the Mahdi. Sometimes it's pronounced Mahdi. but I'm not 100% sure if it's always Mahdi. I think it might be Mahdi, which is the pronunciation I've been going with. Let's read about this particular figure and his persecution of Jews and Christians. Interestingly, these are Joel Richardson's words. Interestingly enough, Islamic tradition speaks much of the Mahdi's special calling to convert Christians and Jews to Islam, yet speaks very little specifically of conversions from other faiths. So there seems to be some concentrated effort in the Islamic worldview to focus on Jews and Christians. This seems to make a bit of sense when you remember the fact that the three religions are referred to as Abrahamic religions because we are all rooted in Abraham, our father. Going back historically, we would say Judaism and then Christianity and then Islam in that order of how the religions kind of appeared on the world scene. And yet we all are rooted in Abraham, our father. So that's why perhaps maybe there's some shared eschatology between the three religions, some shared worldviews, some overlap a little bit here and there. Let's keep reading Joel. He says, it seems as though converting Christians and Jews to Islam will be the primary evangelistic thrust of the Mahdi. The following quote, he says, from Ayatollah Ibrahim Amini clearly articulates this vision. So we're looking at some religious Islamic specialist that's being quoted from. I don't know if he's a religious leader. I'm sorry, I don't know if he is another Imam. I don't know if he's just a historical person who studies Islam, but apparently he's got enough influence that it caught the attention of Joel Richardson to include him in the book. Here's the quote. This gentleman says, the Mahdi will offer the religion of Islam to the Jews and Christians, and if they accept it, they will be spared. Otherwise, they will be killed. So this goes along with what I talked about earlier, the kind of the forced conversion, the idea that it's our way or the highway, right? You've heard the saying, it's my way or the highway. Again, that fits with the Borg mentality. Resistance is futile. You either have to join us or you will be destroyed. So you have to be assimilated within our groups and you lose your distinctive identity. You join the collective. You join the hive mind. Those of you who are Star Trek buffs, you guys know what I'm talking about. Those of you who don't watch Star Trek, you're probably lost to my little allusions here, my little examples. Joel continues, and of course, we cannot forget the infamous hadith that has become a favorite of many Muslims, anti-Semites. And again, the hadith, I'm probably not getting the exact description of what this represents, but it's not the Quran, it's an extra Quranic reference or resource that was put together, collected by some of Muhammad's sayings or Muhammad's teachings, something to that effect. I'll flash a little definition of what hadith is on the screen in post-production, but just know that it's forms part of the two kind of branch legs of theology and primary source of spiritual information that Muslims draw from when they're talking about the Quran and the teachings of Muhammad. So the hadith is one of those.